The cold water hit me like a slap across the face. My heart raced as the shock of the ocean's chill froze every inch of my body. I remember the last words my son said to me. Before I was pushed into the sea, "Say hello to the sharks." He swam away, leaving me behind alone and helpless, 10 miles from shore. It was the ultimate betrayal. My own flesh and blood, my son, had just tried to kill me. I fought to keep my head above the water, fighting against the waves, not for survival, but for revenge. I thought of all the years I spent raising him, teaching him right from wrong, and now here I was, facing the harsh reality that he wanted me dead for nothing more than greed. He thought he'd broken me, that he'd won, but as the cold waves pulled at my body, I realized something. I wasn't going to die here, not today. As I struggled to keep my focus, my mind raced back to the moments before it all went wrong. It all started so differently. I remember a time when things were simpler. My son, Arnold, was just a boy, full of life and curiosity. I taught him to fish by the lake. Those days were filled with laughter, patience, and joy. He was my pride, and joy always eager to learn, always trying to be the best version of himself. But somewhere along the way, things changed. The smile he wore as a child, the one that made my heart swell with pride, was replaced by a different look there, one of entitlement. It was subtle at first, but I began to notice it when he graduated from college. He was no longer the boy I'd raised, but a man with his own ideas, his own ambitions, and his own set of values that didn't align with the lessons I'd tried to instill. Arnold had always been competitive, driven, but this drive turned darker over time. He began to make choices I didn't agree with, reckless ones, gambling, bad investments. I tried to help him, to guide him, but he pushed me away every time. And then the phone call came. He wanted money, more money than I could ever give him. He had big plans, big ideas, but no way to fund them. That's when the pressure began, the day it happened. I wasn't expecting it. I thought we were just going on a fishing trip, just his simple day out on the water, like we used to do when he was a boy. But things felt off. Arnold's tone had changed when he called. He was too eager, too insistent. He kept talking about the big fish, and how we'd need to go farther out than usual. "You'll love it, Dad," he said, his voice strained. "Trust me, it's going to be an adventure." I should have known. I should have seen the signs. As we headed out on the boat, the familiar sights of the coastline began to fade. The air grew heavier, and I felt the tension between us rise. We were getting farther from shore, farther than we had ever been before. And then, just like that, it happened. Arnold turned the boat around, and with a swift push, I was thrown into the water. I couldn't believe it. There was no warning, no hesitation. One moment, we were father and son, about to share a quiet moment on the ocean. The next, I was struggling to stay afloat, watching my son's boat disappear into the distance. The ocean felt endless. I was cold, exhausted, and alone. But I wasn't going to die here. Not today. I thought about everything I had been through, everything I had taught Arnold. My life had been a series of lessons, lessons about love, loyalty, and honor. Yet somehow, none of that mattered to him. He wanted money. He wanted everything I had. But I wasn't going to let him have it. Not like this. Not after what he'd done. As I swam, I thought of Margaret, my late wife. Her words echoed in my mind. Never give up. Norbert, no matter how impossible things seem, there's always hope. I clung to those words as the coldness of the water seeped into my bones. Hours passed. The waves didn't get any easier, but I kept going. I had no other choice. 7 days passed, 7 long days of silence. No phone calls, no messages from Arnold. I kept waiting for an apology, for some sign that he still cared. But it never came. Then, on the 7th day, my phone rang. It was Arnold. His voice was different, softer. "Dad, I need to apologize," he said. I could hear the regret in his words. I had no idea what he'd been through, but I knew this was my chance to rebuild what had been broken. We talked about fishing, about the old days when we'd go to the lake. And just like that, the walls between us began to crumble. Arnold wasn't the same man who had tried to kill me just a week ago. He was the boy I used to know, the one who had laughed with me. By the lake, we arranged to go fishing the next day, just like old times. But something felt off. Again, when we set out, Arnold seemed too eager to focus on the destination. And when we reached the spot, far out in the ocean, I realized too late that this wasn't a fishing trip. It was a trap. As the boat drifted farther from shore, Arnold's true intentions became clear. He wasn't here to fish. He was here to finish what he had started. He had pushed me into the ocean once, but he hadn't counted on me surviving. The fight for survival had changed me. I wasn't the same man who had once been proud of his son. I had survived, and now I was ready for justice. When we returned home, I confronted Arnold, the man who had betrayed me, the man who had tried to kill me, was finally going to face the consequences of his actions. The police were waiting for him. Arnold was arrested that day. His life, and the life I had built, would never be the same. The courtroom was colder than I expected. It wasn't the physical chill, but the weight of facing my own son. The same boy I had raised, the same boy I had loved. Now, he sat in front of me, slumped and defeated, his once confident demeanor completely shattered. The trial felt like an eternity. Every word, every piece of evidence felt like a punch to my chest. I watched as Arnold's lawyer tried to spin the narrative, tried to make excuses for what he'd done. But there was no excuse. Not when you push your father into the ocean with the intent to kill him. Not when you let greed drive you to commit such a monstrous act. I looked at Arnold, sitting there with his head bowed, his eyes empty. For a moment, I almost felt pity for him. But then I remembered the fear I saw in his eyes the day he abandoned me. The satisfaction in his voice as he told me that he hoped the sharks would get me. I wasn't sure if Arnold had ever truly realized the depth of what he had done. Maybe it was guilt that drove him to apologize later. Or maybe it was just the fear of losing everything. But the reality was that no matter how much he regretted it now, the damage was done. And in that courtroom, the truth came out. The judge's voice was calm but firm as she delivered the sentence. 20 years for attempted murder, she announced. Her words echoed through the courtroom, each one carrying the weight of the betrayal I had suffered. Arnold didn't look at me as he was led away in handcuffs, but I saw his shoulders slump further with each step. He had been so sure of himself, so confident that he could get away with it. But now, he was paying the price for his actions. The courtroom erupted with whispers as Arnold's lawyer tried to protest the sentence. But there was no changing it. Justice had been served. I had survived. And Arnold had been held accountable for what he'd done the months after the trial passed. In a blur, the pain of what Arnold had done still lingered in my heart. But with time, I learned to heal. Margaret's memory was a constant source of strength for me, reminding me that life had to go on, that I had to keep going. I focused on my grandchildren, on the family that still cared for me. I started volunteering with an ocean rescue program, sharing my survival story with others who might one day find themselves in the same situation. The program was a way for me to turn the trauma into something meaningful, something that could help others survive. I never reached out to Arnold. His letters from prison sat in a drawer, unopened. Maybe one day I'd read them. Maybe one day I'd visit him. But not now. Not yet. Forgiveness wasn't something that came overnight. It was a process, a long and difficult one. But I wasn't angry anymore. I had come to terms with what had happened. Arnold had made his choices, and now he had to live with them. A few years passed. Life had moved on, but there were still days when the pain resurfaced. When I thought about what could have been, what should have been, then, one morning, as I was walking through the park, I saw him. It wasn't planned. I wasn't expecting it. But there he was, standing on the sidewalk, looking at me with eyes that seemed different, older, regretful. He looked like the boy I had raised, the boy I had loved. At first, I didn't know what to say. The anger, the betrayal, it was all still there, just beneath the surface. But when he spoke, his voice cracked with emotion. "Dad, I'm sorry. I know what I did. I've been trying to make sense of it all, but I can't." And for the first time in years, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel hatred. I felt nothing. The years of pain, the anger, the regret, it had all washed away. I didn't forgive him right away, but I didn't need to. I just nodded and said, "I'm glad you're still alive." It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. It wasn't the happy ending I had once dreamed of. But it was enough for the first time in years. We were able to talk, really talk, about what happened, about the pain we had caused each other, about the love that had once been so strong between us. As time went on, Arnold started to rebuild his life. He got a job, took responsibility for his actions, and little by little, he started to make amends. It wasn't easy for him, and it certainly wasn't easy for me. But we both understood that we had to move forward, and I did. I kept fishing. I kept volunteering. I kept living. The ocean, which had once been a symbol of pain, became something else. It was a place where I found peace, where I could reflect on the past and look toward the future. The same ocean that had nearly taken my life now offered me solace. I realized that I had a choice. I could let the betrayal define me, or I could use it to grow stronger. So, I chose to live. Years later, Arnold wrote me a letter. It wasn't much, just a few words, but it was enough. I'm proud of you, Dad. I'll never forget what you did. I'll never forget how you survived. And I'll never forget the love you gave me. It wasn't the perfect ending, but it was real. Arnold had finally learned the value of life, of family, of love. He had paid the price for his actions, but he had also learned from them. As for me, I had learned that sometimes the greatest lessons come from the darkest places. And while the ocean had tested my will to live, it had also given me a new purpose. I look back on all that has happened, and I realize that the ocean, in its vastness and coldness, didn't just take something from me, it gave me something in return. It gave me a deeper understanding of myself, of my family, and of the fragile nature of life. Justice had been served, and life, in all its unpredictability, continued. I was no longer the man I once was, but I was stronger for it, and I would carry that strength with me, knowing that the ocean, the same ocean that nearly claimed my life, had also taught me how to live. This is a much more introspective, emotional version of the story, with a deeper focus on the journey of survival, reflection, and eventual reconciliation. If you'd like me to continue or adjust the tone, let me know. It's strange how life unfolds. We spend so much time planning, thinking we can predict what will happen, only to be knocked down by the unexpected. I had spent so many years imagining my life after Arnold, what it would be like when he was gone, when I could finally put the betrayal behind me. I thought that time would heal the wounds. But time doesn't erase the past, does it? It just gives us space to process it. There was a moment, not long ago, when I stood at the edge of the ocean, just me and the vast, endless water, the same water that had once been my prison. I closed my eyes and breathed in the salt air, letting it fill my lungs, clearing my mind. And I thought about Arnold again. I thought about the boy I raised, the man he became, and the man he was still trying to be. There was a piece of him inside that still wanted to make things right, and a part of me wanted to believe it. Forgiveness is never easy. It's not about saying it didn't hurt or pretending the betrayal never happened. It's about letting go of the anger and finding peace in your own heart. I realized I had forgiven Arnold, not because he deserved it, but because I needed to move forward. I needed peace, and I couldn't find it while holding onto that rage. The day Arnold came to see me was quiet. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the yard. He stood there in front of me, his hands clasped together nervously, his eyes not quite meeting mine. He had changed. He wasn't the confident, brash young man who had once tried to kill me. No, this was a man humbled by time, by his mistakes. "Dad, he began, but his voice broke. There was no bravado, no deflection, just raw vulnerability. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, watching him, seeing the man he had become. A man who had spent years in prison thinking about the choices he'd made. I could see the guilt in his eyes, the regret, but there was also something else. A glimmer of hope, a desire to make things right. I know, I finally said, my voice, steady but heavy with emotion. I know what you did, and I know why you did it. But you have to understand something, Arnold. I didn't survive that day because of some divine intervention. I survived because I chose to. And I want you to choose to live differently, to choose to make things right, not just for me, but for you. He nodded, tears welling in his eyes. I don't expect you to forgive me, Dad, not right away. But I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry for everything. It wasn't immediate. There were no grand declarations, no sudden reconciliations. But over time, we rebuilt, slowly. Piece by piece, Arnold began to make amends in his own way. He got a job. He started attending therapy. He tried to repair the relationships he had damaged not just with me, but with others in his life. He'd always been a man of pride, but I saw him humble himself in ways I never thought possible. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was earning it. And that's when I realized forgiveness isn't a moment. It's a journey, a long, winding road of actions, not words. The moment Arnold truly began to make amends was the moment I realized I didn't have to carry the weight of his mistakes anymore. I could let go. Years passed, and life moved forward. I continued my work with the Ocean Rescue Program, now teaching others how to survive the impossible. Arnold would come by sometimes to help, sometimes just to talk. It wasn't easy, but it was real. He was still my son, and no matter how far he had fallen, he was still someone I cared for. One day, we stood on the shore, watching the waves crash. We were quiet for a long time, just taking in the sight of the ocean, its unrelenting power and beauty. Do you remember that day? Arnold asked, his voice soft. When I tried to. I remember, I said, turning to face him. But I don't carry it anymore. That day is part of the past. What matters now is what we do with the future. And in that moment, something shifted. We weren't the same people we once were. We had both been broken. But we were healing, together. Years after everything had settled, something unexpected happened. Arnold came to me one morning, a small box in his hands. I've been saving up, he said, nervously. This is for you. I opened the box, and inside was an old fishing lure one I'd lost years ago. The very one that had belonged to my father. It was battered and worn, but still in one piece. I found it, Arnold said, his voice filled with emotion. And I wanted you to have it. I know it's not much, but it's all I could think to give you. I took the lure in my hand, the weight of it grounding me in a place of deep emotion. It was more than just a fishing lure. It was a symbol of everything. We had gone through everything we had lost, and everything we had gained. You don't have to give me anything, Arnold, I said, a smile tugging at my lips. But thank you. This means more than you know. The years have gone by, and I find myself thinking less about what happened and more about what we've rebuilt. Arnold and I still talk, still fish, still remember the days when everything was simpler. But now, we understand that life is anything but simple. It's unpredictable, unforgiving at times, but also filled with moments of grace. There's still pain, of course. There are still scars, but they don't define us anymore. The ocean, in its endless waves, taught me that survival isn't about avoiding the storm. It's about riding it out, even when you don't know if you'll make it. And when the storm clears, you find yourself on the other side, stronger, changed, but still alive. As I sit here, watching the sun set over the ocean, I think about everything that's happened, the betrayal, the survival, the reconciliation. Life is a strange thing. It can knock you down, tear you apart, and leave you with nothing. But if you hold on, if you keep pushing forward, it can also teach you things you never thought possible. And so, I've learned this final lesson. It's never too late to rebuild. Whether it's a relationship, a dream, or even your own soul, there's always a way forward. As long as you're willing to face the storm, to embrace the struggle, and to never give up. And that's something no ocean, no betrayal, and no amount of time can take away. There are days when the weight of the past feels lighter, and then there are days when it feels heavier than ever. But as I sit here on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realize that every day is a choice to move forward or a choice to get stuck in what once was. The waves continue their endless rhythm, never ceasing, always pushing forward. And for the first time in a long time, I understand why. Life isn't a straight line. It's more like the ocean, vast, unpredictable, sometimes calm, sometimes stormy. But through it all, it keeps moving. It keeps changing. And just like the ocean, I've learned that I must do the same. It took time, but I eventually found peace in the most unlikely place, within myself. I no longer look back with anger, no longer dwell on what was lost or who I could have been if things had gone differently, because, in the end, I can't change the past. What I can change is how I move forward. I remember one evening when Arnold and I went fishing together. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the water. We didn't say much, there was no need. We'd both said everything we needed to say a long time ago. Now, it was just about the simple act of being together. As the boat gently rocked in the water, Arnold handed me the rod. "Dad," "You don't need to say it," I interrupted. I could see the sincerity in his eyes. "I know." And for the first time in years, we just sat in silence, casting our lines into the water, waiting for a bite. It wasn't about the fish. It wasn't about the ocean. It was about us learning how to simply be. As time passed, I started looking at life with a different perspective. The betrayal, the pain, the betrayal, it was all part of a bigger story. A story that's not over yet. I realized I didn't have to carry the weight of the past forever. I could start a new chapter. Arnold could too. We both could. Arnold went on to make a life for himself outside of the shadow of his mistakes. He rebuilt his reputation, found work that he loved, and slowly, He started to reconnect with the people he had lost. I never expected that to happen. But I suppose that's what happens when you decide to change. You don't just change your circumstances, you change yourself. And in that change, you start to rebuild what you thought was broken beyond repair. I watched him become the man I always knew he could be, not the man who had tried to kill me, but the man who learned from his mistakes and found redemption. It wasn't easy, and I'm sure he still has days where the past haunts him. But he's trying, and that's what matters. I've spent a lot of time at sea, more than most people, I'd say. But it wasn't until after everything that I truly understood the wisdom of the ocean. The ocean doesn't care about your past. It doesn't care about your mistakes. It doesn't hold grudges. It simply is. It's always moving, always changing, and always present. That's how I want to live my life now, not stuck in the past, not clinging to what could have been, but moving forward with the understanding that life will throw challenges my way. Some of them I'll face with my head held high, others I'll face with my heart broken wide open. But whatever comes, I'll keep moving, just like the ocean does. And so will Arnold, and maybe, just maybe, we'll find our way back to each other completely. There are days when I think back to that moment when I was floating in the cold ocean, struggling to keep my head above water. I remember the feeling of hopelessness, the bitter reality of being betrayed by someone I loved. But as I look back now, I see something different. That moment wasn't just about survival. It was about rediscovery. I rediscovered who I was. Not just a father or a victim, but a man who had the strength to endure the impossible. I rediscovered what truly matters. It wasn't the money. It wasn't the inheritance. It wasn't the possessions or the things I could lose. It was the people I loved. It was the relationships I still had, even when it seemed like everything else was gone. The real treasure wasn't in what I could have left behind, but in the love and the forgiveness I still had to offer. In the end, the legacy I leave behind won't be one of wealth or material things. It won't be about what I accumulated or what I left behind in my will. It will be about the lessons I taught, the lessons about love, about family, about survival, and about forgiveness. It will be about the man I became after everything went wrong, and the way I chose to rebuild. It will be about Arnold, too. His legacy will be one of redemption. A man who found his way back to love and forgiveness, no matter how dark the path seemed. And that's the legacy I want to leave behind. The one that says, no matter what happens, you can always choose to rebuild. Life, like the ocean, doesn't have a final destination. It's always moving, always shifting, and always changing. You can't control where the waves take you, but you can control how you ride them. And so, I look ahead. I look ahead to the future with hope, knowing that no matter what storms may come, I have the strength to face them. Arnold does, too. We both do. Together or apart, we're learning to face life with open hearts. And maybe, just maybe, that's the greatest lesson the ocean has taught me. Not to fear the waves, but to embrace them. Because in the end, the only way to truly live is to let the ocean carry you, wherever it may lead. I used to believe that survival was about strength, that the stronger you were, the longer you could endure. But now, I know it's about something else. It's about grace. It's about letting go. It's about forgiveness and love. And it's about never, ever giving up, no matter how cold the water is. As the years passed, life settled into a rhythm I hadn't anticipated. I had my routines, the simple pleasures of fishing, the quiet mornings watching the sunrise, and spending time with my grandchildren. Life felt full again, not because it was perfect, but because it had become something I could be proud of. Every moment felt like a gift, a chance to build something new, not just for me, but for those who came after me. But there were still days when I looked out at the ocean and remembered what it felt like to be lost in it, to be drowning, not just physically, but emotionally, and in those moments, I found a kind of peace, not in forgetting, but in knowing that I had survived. I thought about Arnold often, more than I cared to admit. He had changed so much, but I still couldn't quite let go of the fatherly desire to protect him. It's funny, isn't it, how a child can grow up and become someone you don't even recognize, but inside, they're still your child. He would visit when he could, sometimes to talk about life, other times just to sit in silence. There was something comforting in those moments, a quiet understanding between us that no words could express. We didn't need to speak about the past anymore. We just needed to be there for each other in the present. As the days turned into years, I started to rediscover love. Not the kind of love that comes from a spouse or the love that comes from a child, but the kind of love that comes from within. I realized that I had been so consumed by anger, by fear, and by betrayal that I forgot the most important part of healing, loving myself. It's a strange thing to come to a point in life where you finally learn to be comfortable in your own skin, to forgive yourself for the things you can't change, and to accept that life isn't always fair, but it's that acceptance that gives you freedom. Freedom from the past, from the pain, and from the shame. I started to volunteer more, offering my story as a lesson in survival, in what it truly means to face down the darkest moments and come out the other side. I spoke to groups of people, sharing how I survived that day in the ocean, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, how I learned to keep my heart open despite everything. People came to me for advice. They wanted to hear how I had survived. But what I told them wasn't about strength. It was about grace, about accepting the things you can't control and finding peace in letting go. One day, I received a letter from Arnold. It had been a while since we'd spoken face to face, but the words in that letter were enough to tell me everything I needed to know. It was short, but heartfelt. Dad, I don't expect you to forgive me for what I did. I don't even know if I can forgive myself, but I need you to know that I'm not that man anymore. I've been through a lot, and I've hurt a lot of people, but I'm trying to make it right. I'm not asking for your approval. I'm asking for your understanding. You taught me how to survive, and now I'm trying to teach myself how to live. I hope that one day you'll be proud of the man I've become. The letter left me sitting quietly for a while, thinking. I knew Arnold's journey wasn't easy, And I knew there were still demons he had to face. But I also knew he was trying. He was trying to find his way, just like I had. And that's all anyone can do. I placed the letter down on the table and sat back in my chair, letting the silence of the room settle around me. In that moment, I didn't feel the anger I had once felt. I felt peace, not because everything had been fixed, but because I understood the journey he was on. And I realized that the man he had become was still, in some ways, the boy I had raised. It wasn't long after that when Arnold called me. His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, a nervousness I hadn't heard in years. "Dad," he said, "I've been thinking about what you said, about how the only way forward is to rebuild. I know I don't deserve it, but I want to try." I could feel his sincerity through the phone, and it struck me how far he had come. The man on the other end of the line wasn't the one who had pushed me into the ocean. He was someone new, someone who had learned from his mistakes. "I'm here," I said simply. "I'm here for whatever you need." That moment, that simple exchange, was the beginning of something new. We didn't have to fix everything in one conversation. We didn't have to erase the past. But we were both willing to try. It wasn't easy, and there were times when I doubted whether we could ever truly get back to where we once were. But I knew this. Rebuilding wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning to live with it, to live in spite of it. One afternoon, Arnold and I went out fishing again. It was the same place we'd always gone, the lake near our old house. The sun was warm on our backs, and the water was still, just like the days when he was young. There was no grand gesture, no deep conversation. We just fished. But as I sat there, watching him cast his line into the water, I realized something. We were rebuilding, not by fixing the past, but by accepting it, by being willing to stand next to each other, even after everything that had happened. And that, in itself, was enough. It wasn't about forgiveness in the way we often think. It wasn't about sweeping things under the rug and pretending like nothing ever happened. It was about choosing to move forward together, one step at a time. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not just for me, but for Arnold, for our family, for the future. As I grow older, I think about what legacy I'll leave behind. It's not about wealth or possessions, not about how many things I accumulate. It's about the relationships I've built, the people I've loved, and the lessons I've learned along the way. The ocean taught me about survival, but life taught me about forgiveness, and I will carry those lessons with me until the end. Because, in the end, it's not the storms that define us. It's how we weather them, and how we choose to rebuild once they've passed. Arnold and I don't have all the answers. We've made mistakes, we've hurt each other, and we've struggled to find our way. But the important thing is this: we're still here, and we're still trying. And sometimes, that's all you can ask for. As I sit here now, watching the ocean stretch out before me, I think back on everything that has happened. The betrayals, the heartache, the pain. But I also think of the love that's still here. The love that never left, even when I thought it was gone. And so, I look forward, not with fear, but with hope. Because in the end, hope is what keeps you moving forward. Even when you're unsure of where the road will take you, the ocean may be vast and life may be unpredictable. But one thing is certain, I'm still here, and that's enough.